Captain Midnight.
It's been over a year since the release of Batman v Superman gave us the first look at Ben Affleck's portrayal of the Caped Crusader. And since then, we've seen him pop up in Suicide Squad and a few trailers for Justice League. But there's still a lot we don't know about this interpretation of the character. In fact, we can't even really be sure if Ben Affleck will still be in the role once his solo film rolls around. Sure, he made a speech at Comic-Con about how much he loves playing Batman, but he didn't definitively shoot the rumors down. But I'm not really here to talk about any of that, because whether Ben Affleck stays in the role or not, I'm actually feeling more positive about the future of the Batman franchise than I have in years. I have my problems with BVS and Suicide Squad, definitely, but I think they've managed to set up a perfectly decent skeleton to build off of when creating a new series of Batman films. But mostly it's because of one guy and what he's been saying about the movie, which as of right now is still titled The Batman. That guy is recently hired director Matt Reeves. Not only has Reeves proved that he's a pretty talented individual, but he's also been saying things about the new movie that has me very interested. According to him, he wants the new Batman to be a noir-driven detective version. As someone who loves noirs and who feels the detective aspects of Batman have been overlooked in past films, I have to say I'm pretty on board. But I want to examine these ideas a little more deeply. Where should the filmmakers look for inspiration for this version of The Dark Knight? And what does noir-driven mean exactly? The purpose of this video is to answer those questions, and hopefully come away with a clearer understanding of Batman's past and where he should go in the future.
You're one of those who just can't get enough of Batman. Help is here.
According to Tim Burton, his primary influence when directing Batman was Alan Moore's The Killing Joke. For Christopher Nolan's first film, he looked to Frank Miller's Batman Year One and Jeff Loeb's The Long Halloween. And Zack Snyder was obviously very into Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns when making BVS. These comics have been the main influence on filmmakers when translating Batman to the screen. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. I mean, I think all those comics are great. But did you notice anything a little weird about them? The Dark Knight Returns is the oldest of the bunch, being released in 1986. Year One followed in 87. Killing Joke came out in 88. And finally, The Long Halloween brings up the rear in 1996. So 10 years. That is only 10 years of stories from a character that's been around for nearly 80. As great as those comics are, focusing on one specific era has kind of limited the options of what a Batman film can be. I mean, I guess there was the Joel Schumacher films, which largely tried to blend Burton's take on the character with the tongue-in-cheek camp of the Adam West show, but I mean, let's not talk about those.
Cool party.
My point is, while there's been some great Batman movies, there is still so much more to explore in the character's history, which brings us back to Matt Reeves' movie, and one era of Batman that I don't think has ever really gotten the attention it deserves, the Denny O'Neil, Neil Adams run of the late 60s and early 70s. Yes, there's also a lot of recent work that Matt Reeves and company should definitely check out too, but when it comes to well-written, mystery-driven Batman stories, this era is hard to beat. There's this annoying thing that I notice when a lot of people talk about the history of Batman, where they kind of put together the timeline like this. A. Bob Kane, Bill Finger original stuff, important, kind of dark. B. A bunch of really goofy stuff, including the Adam West TV show. And, C. Alan Moore and Frank Miller make Batman cool and serious again. And that kind of annoys me. Not that Frank Miller and Alan Moore didn't take Batman in a darker direction, they definitely did. But the 60s and 70s were filled with great writers and artists, creating nuanced, well-told stories about the character. This Batman solved his problems with his sleuthing skills just as often as his fists. And yeah, he also had a large extended cast, but he was still something of a loner. And the burden of his parents' murder weighed on his thoughts in a way that they didn't in the more carefree Golden Age era. This interpretation of Batman would set the template that so many writers would follow, and I'm convinced that stuff like Batman the Animated Series couldn't really exist without it. Now, to be fair, Nolan was inspired by some of Denny O'Neil's later work, namely The Man Who Falls, but overall it just doesn't really feel like he's gotten his due. Stories like The Curse of Crime Alley, The Joker's 5-Way Revenge, and One Bullet Too Many aren't just great superhero comics, they're great stories, period. And I would love for Affleck's interpretation of the character to take more ideas from this era of Batman, especially his less techy and more intelligence and intuition-based approach to detective work. And why not take advice from how to build a story from Batman legend Denny O'Neil himself? In his great 2001 book about writing comics, he lays out what he believes makes a great Batman story. And while yes, comics and films are obviously very different mediums, I think there's still a lot to be gained from his advice. And there's one piece of advice that he really harps on over and over again. Don't waste the audience's time. The essence of drama, especially melodrama, is compression. Show only what's important. Start the scene as late as possible, and once the dramatic point is made, end it. This might just be the defining trait of O'Neil's work. His Batman stories tend to be tight, efficient, and don't waste time with anything that didn't add to the story he was telling. And honestly, I think the DC movies could learn a lot from this. Like a lot of blockbusters these days, they tend to be a bit bloated and include a lot of extra stuff that we don't need and that's only there to sell us on buying a ticket to a movie that isn't even out yet. There's a lot the filmmakers could take and learn from Denny O'Neil, and I hope they do in The Batman.
Video cassette for just $19.99. Call now and this Batman pin is yours free.
Moving on, I want to talk about the other section of Matt Reeves' statement, the part about the next Batman being noir-driven. Most people associate the noir genre with hard-boiled detectives and cool cinematography that takes advantage of the shadows, but the genre is so much more than that, and by embracing noir, like really embracing it, not just the superficial surface elements of it, the filmmakers could create a very unique Batman movie. Batman and the noir genre go together very well. It's only natural, really. Both have their roots in the late 1930s, and early Batman writers drew a lot of inspiration from the noir crime stories that they had just seen in theaters. Just as early Batman stories were providing a darker, more cynical take on superheroes than fellow superhero Superman, who debuted a year before him, film noirs gave audience a much different cinematic experience than the glamorous, brightly lit fare they were used to seeing from studios like MGM. Filled with flickering street lamps, corruption, and more often than not, disillusioned and alienated protagonists, it's easy to see why putting Batman and film noir together just seems natural. And yet there's some aspects of the genre that don't really mesh with what a modern superhero blockbuster is expected to do. For all the images of Humphrey Bogart being cool and confident that we probably think of when we think of the noir protagonist, the truth is, more often than not, they don't exactly come out on top. Double Indemnity, The Third Man, even The Maltese Falcon, they don't have happy endings. And many film noirs, like In a Lonely Place or Detour, don't have an ultra-competent, always-in-control hero like Batman as the lead. They're usually about guys in way over their heads, who don't know how bad things are about to get for them. Oh, and by the way, if you've never seen Detour, it's in the public domain, so you can totally watch it on YouTube for free, and you should, because it's awesome. But anyway, more often than not, film noir is about characters whose foolishness, arrogance, or hubris leads to their whole world slowly closing in around them until they're left with nothing. Even your classic noir detectives aren't really able to actually change anything. Yeah, they're smart and cool, but usually they aren't able to stop any of the crime and corruption that's going on around them. But how would this apply to Batman? Well, remember last year when Sad Affleck was making the rounds? It was funny, and there's definitely some truth underneath it. The guy just seems sad lately. I think they should lean into that with this new Batman. He looks older, grayer, and a little more weathered. We know that the Robin of the DCEU is probably dead, and he probably died at Joker's hands. We also know that Joss Whedon's Batgirl is being made, but doesn't appear to really be part of Bruce Wayne's life right now. That's interesting to me. The Batman extended family is something Chris Nolan's films never really got into, but I think they could put it to good use here, because this Bruce Wayne seems pretty lonely. It's mostly just him and Alfred. An older, more experienced Batman, who has seen Robin die and Batgirl drift away from him, all while he fails to really make Gotham any better, is much more in line with a noir protagonist than Batman might appear at first glance, and it's all about using that. There's always this talk of DC's movies not being fun enough. It's a common complaint I hear, and honestly, I think it's a pretty shallow one. Give audiences a well-executed, thoughtful, and actually noir-driven Batman, and I think it would make people just as excited as any fun Marvel movie. But to do that, DC needs to drop the bloated scenes, the poorly done cross-franchise promotion, and have the guts to really mess with the superhero movie formula. Like, I can't think of a film noir that ends with a giant battle against a monster that knocks down buildings, so maybe this time around, don't do that, and embrace something different. And that's going to be tough, because American film studios hate doing that. But by really leaning into the noir elements of Batman and his world, you have a chance to give audiences something that they haven't really seen on the big screen yet.
Freeze is back in town, and only one man can stop him.
Really though, all this stuff, taking inspiration from the 70s comics, going full-on film noir, that's just what I'd like to see. I'd love to read your comments. Where do you see Batman going next? If you liked this video, be sure to like and subscribe, which will let me know if you guys want to see more videos like this one in the future. Oh, and honestly guys, thanks for watching. The feedback that I've been getting on this channel the last month or so has been really incredible.